Question 1. The audit findings indicate a concern regarding the accuracy of information provided to individuals seeking or renewing their Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License, specifically concerning the permissible locations for carrying a concealed weapon. Which of the following approaches best addresses this concern and ensures compliance with Idaho law? Option A. Assume that an enhanced license generally permits carrying a concealed weapon in most public places, with only a few universally recognized exceptions, and advise trainees accordingly. Option B. Consult general firearms training resources and common interpretations of concealed carry laws across various states to provide a broad overview of potential restrictions. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the current Idaho Code, particularly Idaho Code Section 18-3302, to identify any specific restrictions or prohibitions on carrying a concealed weapon under an enhanced license, and update all training materials and advisories to reflect these precise legal requirements. Option D. Advise trainees that the audit finding is likely a minor administrative issue, and that their existing understanding of concealed carry rights is sufficient, without further specific review of Idaho statutes. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the current Idaho Code, particularly Idaho Code Section 18-3302, to identify any specific restrictions or prohibitions on carrying a concealed weapon under an enhanced license, and update all training materials and advisories to reflect these precise legal requirements. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to Idaho's regulations concerning the Enhanced Concealed Weapons License. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the Idaho Code, specifically concerning the permissible locations for carrying a concealed weapon under an enhanced license, and the proper procedures for handling situations where an individual may be exceeding those limitations. The auditor's concern highlights the critical need for licensed individuals to be fully aware of their responsibilities, and for instructors to provide comprehensive and accurate training. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the Idaho Code, specifically focusing on Idaho Code Section 18-3302, which outlines the restrictions on carrying concealed weapons, even with an enhanced license. This approach prioritizes accurate legal interpretation and direct application of statutory requirements. It ensures that any training or advice provided is grounded in the specific legal framework of Idaho, thereby preventing potential violations by license holders. This is the best professional practice because it directly addresses the auditor's concern by ensuring compliance with the law. An incorrect approach would be to rely on general interpretations of concealed carry laws without specific reference to Idaho's statutes. This is professionally unacceptable because it risks providing outdated or inaccurate information, potentially leading license holders to unknowingly violate Idaho law. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that an enhanced license grants unrestricted carry privileges, ignoring the explicit limitations detailed in Idaho Code Section 18-3302. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the licensing framework and is ethically problematic as it could lead to dangerous situations and legal repercussions for the license holder. Finally, an approach that dismisses the auditor's findings without a proper investigation into the specific Idaho regulations would be negligent and unprofessional, failing to uphold the integrity of the licensing and training process. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the specific jurisdiction's laws. When faced with an audit finding or a training question, the first step is to consult the relevant statutes and administrative rules of that jurisdiction. If there is ambiguity, seeking clarification from the issuing authority or legal counsel specializing in firearms law is advisable. Training materials and advice must be demonstrably aligned with these legal requirements, and any updates to the law must be promptly incorporated. Question 2. Strategic planning requires an applicant for an Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License to demonstrate a thorough understanding of not only the explicit legal requirements for licensure, but also the implicit ethical responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm. Which of the following best reflects this comprehensive approach to preparedness? Option A. Demonstrating a deep knowledge of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, including prohibited places and the duty to inform, coupled with a commitment to ongoing safe storage, handling, and refresher training. Option B. relying on personal interpretation of self-defense needs to determine when and where carrying a firearm is appropriate, irrespective of Idaho's specific legal statutes. Option C, focusing primarily on completing the minimum training hours and passing the background check to secure the license as quickly as possible. Option D, prioritizing the right to carry a concealed weapon at all times and in all places, with minimal regard for specific legal restrictions or situational awareness. The correct answer is A, demonstrating a deep knowledge of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, including prohibited places and the duty to inform, coupled with a commitment to ongoing safe storage, handling, and refresher training. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to balance their understanding of Idaho's concealed weapons laws with the practical realities of responsible firearm ownership and the potential for unintended consequences. The challenge lies in demonstrating not just knowledge of the statutes, but also the judgment and ethical considerations paramount to carrying a concealed weapon. A superficial understanding can lead to dangerous oversights. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive understanding of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, specifically focusing on the requirements for obtaining and maintaining a concealed weapons license, alongside a proactive commitment to safe storage and handling practices. This includes understanding the legal definitions of concealed and openly carried, prohibited places, and the duty to inform law enforcement. Furthermore, it necessitates a personal commitment to ongoing training and awareness of legal changes. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the statutory requirements for licensure, while also embodying the ethical responsibilities inherent in carrying a firearm, ensuring both legal compliance and public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on the minimum legal requirements for obtaining the license, such as completing the required training and passing the background check, without considering the broader implications of responsible firearm ownership. This fails to address the ethical dimension and the proactive measures necessary to prevent accidents or misuse, which are implicitly expected of a licensed carrier. Another incorrect approach emphasizes the right to carry, without fully acknowledging the associated responsibilities and restrictions. This perspective might overlook specific prohibitions on carrying in certain locations, e.g., schools, federal buildings, or the duty to act responsibly when encountering law enforcement, potentially leading to legal entanglements and endangering public safety. A third incorrect approach prioritizes personal convenience or perceived self-defense needs above all else, potentially leading to carrying a firearm in situations or locations where it is legally prohibited or ethically questionable. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the legal framework and the importance of respecting community safety and legal boundaries. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this by first thoroughly reviewing Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, and any relevant administrative rules. They should then engage in continuous learning, seeking out reputable training that covers not only legal aspects, but also defensive shooting principles and ethical considerations. When faced with a decision about carrying or storing a firearm, professionals should ask, am I legally permitted to do so in this specific location and circumstance? And am I acting in a manner that upholds the highest standards of safety and responsibility? This dual legal and ethical framework ensures compliance and promotes public trust. Question 3. Compliance review shows that an Idaho resident who was convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence 10 years ago believes they have since reformed and are a responsible citizen. They are considering carrying a concealed weapon in Idaho. Which of the following actions best reflects responsible compliance with Idaho's concealed weapons laws? Option A. Apply for a concealed weapons license, omitting the misdemeanor domestic violence conviction from the application, believing it is no longer relevant. Option B. Refrain from carrying a concealed weapon due to the past misdemeanor domestic violence conviction, as it is a statutory disqualifier under Idaho law. Option C. Carry a concealed weapon under Idaho's permitless carry provisions, as this overrides any prior misdemeanor convictions. Option D. Carry a concealed weapon, assuming that the passage of time and personal rehabilitation have nullified the legal impact of the past conviction. The correct answer is B. Refrain from carrying a concealed weapon due to the past misdemeanor domestic violence conviction, as it is a statutory disqualifier under Idaho law. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their personal beliefs and perceived rights with the specific legal requirements for carrying a concealed weapon in Idaho. The core of the challenge lies in understanding that, while Idaho law generally permits concealed carry, it does so under specific conditions and with certain limitations, particularly concerning individuals who have been convicted of certain offenses. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges. The correct approach involves a thorough and accurate understanding of Idaho's concealed weapon laws, specifically focusing on the disqualifying factors for obtaining or maintaining a concealed weapons license. This means recognizing that a past conviction for a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, even if it occurred years ago and the individual believes they have reformed, is a statutory disqualifier under Idaho Code Section 18-3302. Adhering to this legal framework by refraining from carrying a concealed weapon due to the disqualifying conviction is the only legally compliant and ethically sound course of action. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law, which is paramount for responsible firearm ownership and public safety. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the passage of time or personal rehabilitation negates a statutory disqualification. Idaho law does not provide for an automatic restoration of rights based on time elapsed for certain offenses, and an individual must follow specific legal procedures to have their rights restored, if at all. Relying on a personal belief that the conviction is no longer relevant or that the law is overly strict is a direct violation of Idaho Code Section 18-3302 and demonstrates a failure to understand the legal ramifications of past convictions. Another incorrect approach would be to seek a concealed weapons license without fully disclosing the past conviction. Idaho Code Section 18-3302 mandates that an applicant must attest to not being disqualified. Failing to disclose a disqualifying factor constitutes a false statement, which is a separate offense and undermines the integrity of the licensing process. This approach demonstrates a disregard for the legal requirements and the truthfulness expected in official applications. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to carry a concealed weapon based on a general understanding of Idaho's permitless carry laws, without considering the specific disqualifications that apply even under permitless carry. While Idaho has permitless carry, this right is not absolute and is subject to the same disqualifications as those seeking a license. Believing that permitless carry overrides all prior disqualifications is a dangerous misinterpretation of the law. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a commitment to understanding and strictly adhering to all applicable state laws. When in doubt about legal eligibility, individuals should consult with legal counsel or the relevant state authorities responsible for firearm licensing to ensure full compliance before engaging in any activity that requires legal authorization. Question 4. Strategic planning requires Idaho's enhanced concealed weapons license program to consider how to best equip licensees with practical skills and legal knowledge. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for enhanced preparedness with strict adherence to Idaho's legal framework for concealed carry? Option A. Implement advanced marksmanship drills and tactical shooting techniques as the primary focus of the enhanced training, assuming that improved shooting proficiency inherently leads to safer concealed carry. Option B. Develop a revised training curriculum that integrates scenario-based exercises focusing on de-escalation, legal justifications for force, and situational awareness, ensuring all components align with Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, and are subject to Idaho State Police review. Option C. Adopt a standardized training program widely used in other states, assuming its principles are universally applicable to concealed carry laws and practices in Idaho. Option D. Introduce a mandatory, significantly more expensive, and time-consuming training module that includes advanced defensive tactics unrelated to firearm proficiency, without prior consultation with the Idaho State Police. Correct answer is B. Develop a revised training curriculum that integrates scenario-based exercises focusing on de-escalation, legal justifications for force, and situational awareness, ensuring all components align with Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, and are subject to Idaho State Police review. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of evolving legal landscapes and public safety concerns, when implementing new training protocols for concealed weapons licensees in Idaho. This scenario is professionally challenging because it necessitates balancing the rights of law-abiding citizens to self-defense with the paramount public interest in ensuring responsible firearm ownership and minimizing the risk of misuse. The challenge lies in developing training that is both effective in enhancing licensee competency and compliant with Idaho's specific statutes and administrative rules governing concealed weapons. The correct approach involves developing a revised training curriculum that directly addresses the identified gaps in practical application and situational awareness, while strictly adhering to the Idaho Code, specifically Title 18, Chapter 33, which outlines the requirements for concealed weapons licenses. This approach prioritizes incorporating scenario-based training that simulates real-world encounters, emphasizing de-escalation techniques, and reinforcing legal justifications for the use of deadly force as defined by Idaho law. It also necessitates ensuring that any new training components are reviewed and approved by the Idaho State Police, as per their oversight responsibilities, and that the training remains accessible and affordable for licensees. This ensures that the enhanced training directly serves the purpose of improving licensee safety and public safety, without creating undue burdens or conflicting with existing legal frameworks. An incorrect approach would be to implement a training program that focuses solely on advanced marksmanship, without adequately covering legal aspects or situational awareness. This fails to meet the holistic requirements for responsible concealed carry, potentially leading licensees to misunderstand their legal obligations or to react inappropriately in a crisis. Such an approach would violate the spirit and letter of Idaho's concealed weapons laws, which aim to ensure licensees are not only proficient with a firearm, but also knowledgeable about when and how it is legally permissible to use it. Another incorrect approach would be to adopt a training program that introduces new, non-statutorily mandated requirements that significantly increase the cost or time commitment for licensees without clear evidence of enhanced public safety benefits. This could inadvertently disenfranchise responsible citizens and create barriers to exercising their Second Amendment rights as protected under Idaho law. It also risks deviating from the established regulatory framework without proper legislative or administrative approval. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on generalized, out-of-state training materials that have not been vetted against Idaho's specific legal definitions of self-defense, justifiable homicide, and the nuances of Idaho's concealed carry statutes. This could lead to licensees being trained on legal principles that do not align with Idaho law, creating confusion and potential legal jeopardy. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a commitment to understanding and meticulously applying the specific legal requirements of Idaho, engaging with relevant state agencies for guidance and approval, and prioritizing training that demonstrably enhances both licensee competency and public safety within the established legal parameters. Question 5. What factors determine the legality of carrying a concealed weapon with an enhanced concealed weapons license in various locations across Idaho, beyond the mere possession of the license itself? Option A. The perceived threat level in the immediate vicinity and the convenience of carrying the weapon. Option B. The individual's personal assessment of the safety of the environment and the absence of explicit no-guns signage. Option C. The specific statutory prohibitions outlined in Idaho Code, the nature of the location, public or private, and the expressed wishes of private property owners. Option D. The discretion of law enforcement officers encountered and the general understanding of firearm rights in Idaho. The correct answer is C. The specific statutory prohibitions outlined in Idaho Code, the nature of the location, public or private, and the expressed wishes of private property owners. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual with an enhanced concealed weapons license in Idaho to navigate the complex interplay between personal discretion, public safety, and specific legal restrictions. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying Idaho Code regarding where concealed weapons are prohibited, even with a valid license, and understanding the nuances of implied consent and the rights of private property owners. Careful judgment is required to avoid unintentional violations of the law, which could lead to criminal charges and revocation of the license, as well as to uphold the principles of responsible firearm ownership. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, specifically concerning the places where carrying a concealed weapon is prohibited, even with a valid enhanced concealed weapons license. This includes recognizing that, while the license grants broader carrying privileges than a basic license, it does not override explicit prohibitions in certain locations such as schools, courthouses, and correctional facilities, nor does it supersede the rights of private property owners to prohibit firearms on their premises. A responsible license holder must proactively identify and respect these restrictions, which may involve looking for signage or inquiring directly if unsure. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and respect for established public and private spaces, aligning with the intent of the Enhanced Concealed Weapons License to allow carrying in more locations, while still maintaining essential safety and security measures. An incorrect approach would be to assume that an Enhanced Concealed Weapons License grants unrestricted carrying privileges everywhere within Idaho. This fails to acknowledge the specific statutory exceptions and the rights of private property owners. Legally, carrying a concealed weapon in a prohibited location, even with a valid license, constitutes a violation of Idaho law. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for public safety and the rights of others. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the absence of explicit no-guns signage as permission to carry a concealed weapon. Idaho law does not require private property owners to post signage to prohibit firearms. Their right to do so can be exercised through verbal or other forms of notice. Failing to respect a property owner's wishes, even if not explicitly posted, can lead to trespassing charges and is a failure to uphold responsible firearm conduct. A third incorrect approach would be to interpret the license as superseding all other laws or rules, including federal regulations or specific rules of private establishments that may have their own firearm policies. While the Enhanced Concealed Weapons License is a state credential, it does not grant immunity from other applicable laws or the rules of private entities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive review of Idaho code related to concealed carry and prohibited locations. This should be followed by a proactive assessment of the environment where they intend to carry, including looking for posted signs, understanding the nature of the location, e.g., school, government building, and being prepared to inquire about policies if there is any ambiguity. Prioritizing legal compliance and respecting the rights of property owners and the public are paramount. Question 6. Strategic planning requires a firearms owner in Idaho seeking an enhanced concealed weapons license to consider the specific training requirements. If an individual believes their extensive personal experience with firearms and completion of a general gun safety course from a private organization adequately prepares them for the responsibilities of an ECL holder, which of the following approaches best aligns with Idaho's legal framework for obtaining such a license? Option A. Seek out a firearms instructor in another state who offers a course that the individual believes is equivalent to Idaho's ECL training. Option B. Rely on personal firearm proficiency and a certificate from a privately held gun safety course, asserting that it covers all necessary safety and legal aspects. Option C. Assume that the training for a standard Idaho concealed weapons license is sufficient and no additional specialized training is needed for the enhanced version. Option D. Complete a firearms training course specifically approved by the Idaho State Police that meets the curriculum requirements for the Enhanced Concealed Weapons License. The correct answer is D. Complete a firearms training course specifically approved by the Idaho State Police that meets the curriculum requirements for the Enhanced Concealed Weapons License. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of evolving legal landscapes and personal responsibilities, especially when dealing with firearms. In Idaho, the Enhanced Concealed Weapons License (ECL) program is designed to allow for concealed carry in more locations than a standard permit, but it comes with specific training and legal obligations. This scenario presents a challenge because it involves a potential conflict between a personal belief about firearm safety and the explicit requirements of the Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License statute and associated administrative rules. A license holder must understand that their personal interpretation of safety protocols cannot supersede legal mandates. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the training requirements mandated by Idaho law for the Enhanced Concealed Weapons License. This means completing the approved firearms training course that specifically covers the curriculum outlined by the Idaho State Police, which includes legal aspects of firearm use and safety. This approach is correct because Idaho Code Section 18-3302(16) and the administrative rules promulgated thereunder e.g. Idaho Administrative Code, Title 11, Chapter 1, explicitly define the requirements for an ECL, including a specific training component. Compliance with these statutory and regulatory mandates is the sole legal pathway to obtaining and maintaining an ECL. An incorrect approach would be to rely on personal experience or informal training to meet the ECL requirements. This is incorrect because Idaho law is specific about the approved training. Simply believing one is proficient or has received adequate instruction elsewhere does not satisfy the statutory requirement for a course approved by the Idaho State Police. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because one possesses a standard concealed weapons license, the training for an ECL is redundant or can be bypassed. This is incorrect as the ECL has distinct and more rigorous training prerequisites than a standard permit. Finally, attempting to substitute a self-designed safety course or a course from a different state without prior approval from Idaho authorities would also be incorrect, as it fails to meet the specific jurisdictional requirements for training within Idaho. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing a thorough understanding of the governing statutes and administrative rules. When seeking an enhanced concealed weapons license in Idaho, the first step should be to consult the official Idaho State Police website or relevant statutes to identify the precise training requirements. If there is any ambiguity, seeking clarification directly from the issuing authority is crucial. Personal beliefs or assumptions about firearm proficiency should never be used as a substitute for legally mandated training and licensing procedures. Question 7. Process analysis reveals that an Idaho resident holding a valid enhanced concealed weapons license is planning a trip that includes visiting a public library, attending a community event held at a public school gymnasium, and stopping at a federal courthouse to drop off a document. Considering Idaho's regulatory framework for concealed weapons, which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to the law? Option A. Believing that dropping off a document at a federal courthouse is a brief, administrative task that does not fall under the typical restrictions for carrying a concealed weapon in federal buildings. Option B. Relying on the understanding that since the community event is at a school gymnasium and not a classroom, carrying a concealed weapon there is permissible. Option C. Researching Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, to identify specific prohibitions regarding carrying a concealed weapon in public libraries, schools, and federal courthouses, and acting in accordance with those identified restrictions. Option D. Assuming that an enhanced concealed weapons license permits carrying in all public spaces, including libraries, schools, and federal courthouses, unless explicitly confronted by law enforcement. The correct answer is C. Researching Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, to identify specific prohibitions regarding carrying a concealed weapon in public libraries, schools, and federal courthouses, and acting in accordance with those identified restrictions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the intersection of personal rights and public safety responsibilities, specifically concerning the carrying of a concealed weapon in Idaho. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying Idaho's statutes regarding concealed weapons, particularly when faced with a situation that could be misconstrued or lead to unintended legal consequences. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the law while upholding the rights granted by a concealed weapons license. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, specifically sections pertaining to concealed weapons licenses and the places where carrying a concealed weapon is prohibited. This approach prioritizes legal compliance by recognizing that while a concealed weapons license grants the right to carry, this right is not absolute and is subject to specific statutory limitations. It involves proactively identifying and respecting no-carry zones as defined by Idaho law, such as schools, courthouses, and federal buildings, and understanding the nuances of private property signage and its legal implications in Idaho. This ensures the licensee acts within the bounds of the law, preventing potential criminal charges and upholding the integrity of the licensing system. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid concealed weapons license grants unrestricted carrying privileges in all locations within Idaho. This fails to acknowledge the specific statutory exceptions and prohibitions outlined in Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, which are designed to balance individual rights with public safety concerns in sensitive areas. This assumption can lead to illegal carrying and subsequent legal penalties. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on personal interpretation of common sense or informal advice regarding carrying restrictions, rather than consulting the explicit language of Idaho statutes. This can lead to misinterpretations of legal requirements, especially concerning the legality of carrying in places with posted signage or in areas with ambiguous public access. Legal compliance demands adherence to codified law, not subjective judgment. A third incorrect approach is to believe that ignorance of specific prohibitions in certain locations excuses carrying a concealed weapon there. Idaho law places the responsibility on the licensee to be aware of and comply with all restrictions. Failing to do so, regardless of intent or knowledge, can result in legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Idaho seeking to exercise their rights under a concealed weapons license should adopt a proactive and informed approach. This involves 1. Thoroughly familiarizing oneself with Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, paying close attention to definitions of prohibited locations and the legal weight of signage. 2. Regularly reviewing any updates or amendments to these laws. 3. Seeking clarification from official sources, such as the Idaho State Police or legal counsel, when uncertain about specific situations. 4. Prioritizing legal compliance over personal convenience or assumptions. This systematic approach ensures responsible exercise of the privilege granted by the license. Question 8. Strategic planning requires the Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License Program to develop training materials that accurately reflect the state's legal framework for carrying concealed firearms. Considering the nuances of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, which of the following approaches to developing these training materials is most professionally sound and legally compliant? Option A. Implement training that interprets Idaho law to allow licensees to carry concealed weapons in any public place unless explicitly forbidden by a sign, without regard for statutory prohibitions in places like schools or government buildings. Option B. Create training that broadly advises licensees to avoid carrying in any location where they feel uncomfortable or where their presence might cause concern, regardless of specific legal prohibitions. Option C. Design training that focuses on the practical aspects of firearm proficiency and self-defense techniques, with only a cursory mention of legal restrictions as a secondary consideration. Option D. Develop training modules that meticulously detail the specific locations and circumstances where carrying a concealed weapon is legally permitted or prohibited under Idaho law, emphasizing the licensee's responsibility to be aware of and adhere to these statutory restrictions. The correct answer is D. Develop training modules that meticulously detail the specific locations and circumstances where carrying a concealed weapon is legally permitted or prohibited under Idaho law, emphasizing the licensee's responsibility to be aware of and adhere to these statutory restrictions. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of various factors when implementing new safety protocols, especially in a sensitive area like concealed carry. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the rights of licensed individuals with the paramount need for public safety and adherence to Idaho's specific firearms regulations. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying the Idaho Code concerning concealed weapons licenses in a way that is both effective and legally sound, avoiding overreach or underestimation of risks. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, specifically focusing on the requirements and limitations for carrying concealed weapons by licensed individuals. This includes understanding the definitions of concealed weapon, public place, and the specific locations where carrying is prohibited or restricted under Idaho law. The approach that best aligns with professional practice is to develop training materials that accurately reflect these statutory provisions, emphasizing the legal responsibilities and restrictions placed upon a licensee. This ensures that licensees are informed about their rights and obligations, promoting responsible gun ownership and minimizing potential legal entanglements or safety risks. The focus is on clear, legally accurate education that empowers licensees to make informed decisions in accordance with Idaho law. An incorrect approach would be to implement training that broadly prohibits carrying in any location not explicitly permitted by the Idaho Code, without considering the nuances of Idaho's preemption laws or specific exceptions. This could infringe upon the rights of licensed individuals by imposing restrictions beyond what is legally mandated. Another incorrect approach would be to create training that suggests a licensee has discretion to carry a concealed weapon in any location they deem safe, disregarding explicit statutory prohibitions on carrying in places like courthouses, schools, or correctional facilities as defined in Idaho Code Section 18-3302. This demonstrates a failure to understand and apply the specific legal boundaries established by the state. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the mechanics of drawing and firing a weapon, without adequately covering the legal framework and prohibited locations, would be professionally deficient. This neglects the critical legal and ethical responsibilities inherent in carrying a concealed weapon under Idaho law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal requirements of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33. 2. Consulting with legal counsel specializing in Idaho firearms law to ensure accurate interpretation. 3. Developing training content that is clear, concise, and directly addresses the rights, responsibilities, and prohibitions outlined in the Idaho Code. 4. Regularly reviewing and updating training materials to reflect any changes in state law. Question 9. In Idaho, while exercising your rights under an enhanced concealed weapons license, you are in a public park and notice a group of individuals exhibiting agitated behavior that causes you a sense of unease. What is the most professional and legally sound course of action? Option A. Conspicuously adjust your concealed firearm or make its presence known to signal your readiness to defend yourself in case the agitated behavior escalates. Option B. Discreetly observe the situation, maintain situational awareness, and remain prepared to act only if a clear and present danger emerges, without drawing attention to yourself or your firearm. Option C. Ignore the group and continue with your activities, assuming their behavior is not a direct threat to you or others. Option D. Immediately approach the group to inquire about their behavior, aiming to de-escalate the situation through direct communication. Correct answer is B. Discreetly observe the situation, maintain situational awareness, and remain prepared to act only if a clear and present danger emerges, without drawing attention to yourself or your firearm. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge for Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License holders, balancing the right to carry with the responsibility to avoid creating unnecessary alarm or conflict in public spaces. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to interpret ambiguous social cues and make a rapid judgment call that could have significant legal and personal ramifications. The core of the challenge lies in discerning between a genuine threat that warrants a visible readiness to defend oneself and a situation where such a display could be perceived as aggressive or intimidating, potentially leading to a lawful response from law enforcement or public complaint. Careful judgment is required to uphold the rights granted by the license, while also acting as a responsible and considerate member of the community. The best approach involves discreetly assessing the situation and maintaining a low profile. This means avoiding any overt actions that could be misinterpreted as threatening or confrontational. Instead, the focus should be on situational awareness, observing surroundings without drawing attention, and being prepared to react only if a clear and present danger emerges. This approach is correct because Idaho law, while granting the right to carry a concealed weapon, also emphasizes responsible behavior and the avoidance of actions that could incite panic or be construed as menacing. Ethically, it aligns with the principle of minimizing harm and avoiding unnecessary escalation. By remaining discreet, the license holder respects the peace and safety of others while retaining their right to self-defense. An incorrect approach would be to conspicuously adjust or display the firearm in response to perceived, but unconfirmed potential threats. This action, even if motivated by a desire for readiness, can be interpreted by others as aggressive or provocative. Legally, such a display could be deemed as brandishing or creating a public disturbance, depending on the specific circumstances and local ordinances, potentially leading to legal repercussions. Ethically, It violates the principle of minimizing harm by potentially creating fear and anxiety in others without a clear and immediate justification. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely, even if a sense of unease or potential danger is present. While discretion is important, complete inaction in the face of a developing threat is a failure of responsible preparedness. The enhanced concealed weapons license implies a commitment to being able to defend oneself and others if necessary. Ethically, this inaction could lead to a preventable harm if a threat materializes and the license holder was not prepared to act. A final incorrect approach is to immediately confront or question individuals who are causing unease without clear evidence of immediate danger. This escalates the situation unnecessarily and can lead to misunderstandings or confrontations that could have been avoided. It bypasses the crucial step of discrete assessment and directly engages in potentially confrontational behavior, which is contrary to the principles of responsible concealed carry. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a tiered approach. First, maintain situational awareness and discreetly observe. Second, assess the level of threat based on objective factors, not just subjective feelings. Third, if a threat is confirmed and immediate, take appropriate defensive action, prioritizing de-escalation and minimizing harm to innocent bystanders. If the situation is ambiguous, err on the side of discretion and avoid actions that could be misinterpreted. Question 10. An Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License holder is preparing for a 2-week hunting trip. They estimate that cleaning their handgun will take approximately 45 minutes, and securing it in a certified gun safe will take an additional 15 minutes. If they plan to perform this maintenance and storage routine every 2 weeks, and they also anticipate spending 3 hours per week on general firearm proficiency practice. What is the total minimum time in hours they must dedicate per month, assuming a 4-week month, to firearm maintenance, secure storage, and proficiency practice to remain compliant with Idaho's responsible firearm ownership principles? Option A, 5 hours. Option B, 0 hours. Option C, 5 hours. Option D, 0 hours. The correct answer is B, 0 hours. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a need for enhanced understanding of firearm safety and legal responsibilities for Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License holders, particularly concerning the practical application of firearm maintenance and storage regulations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a licensee to balance personal convenience with strict legal obligations designed to prevent accidental discharge, unauthorized access, and potential misuse of a firearm. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying Idaho Code Section 18-3302, which outlines the requirements for carrying concealed weapons, and related administrative rules that govern responsible firearm ownership and storage, even when the firearm is not actively being carried. The best professional approach involves a meticulous calculation of the total time required for both cleaning and secure storage, ensuring it aligns with the licensee's operational schedule and the legal mandates for safe storage. This approach prioritizes compliance and safety by acknowledging that the time spent on maintenance and storage is a direct consequence of possessing a firearm, regardless of whether it is currently concealed. The Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License implicitly requires adherence to all applicable firearm laws, including those pertaining to safe storage, as outlined in Idaho Code. Responsible gun ownership, a cornerstone of legal firearm possession, dictates that the time investment in maintaining and securing a firearm is a non-negotiable aspect of its ownership. An incorrect approach would be to solely consider the time spent actively carrying the firearm, or to underestimate the duration required for thorough cleaning and secure storage. For instance, assuming a minimal cleaning time without accounting for detailed inspection and lubrication, or neglecting to factor in the time needed to properly secure the firearm in a compliant safe or lockbox, demonstrates a failure to fully grasp the scope of responsible firearm management. This oversight could lead to a violation of safe storage laws, which are designed to prevent unauthorized access, especially by minors or individuals prohibited from possessing firearms. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize personal convenience over legal requirements, such as rushing the cleaning process or using a less secure storage method to save time. This disregards the ethical imperative to prevent harm and the legal duty to secure firearms as mandated by Idaho law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all relevant Idaho statutes and administrative rules pertaining to firearm possession, carrying, and storage. This should be followed by a realistic assessment of the time and resources required to meet these legal obligations. When faced with time constraints, the professional decision-making process dictates prioritizing legal compliance and safety over personal convenience. This involves accurately estimating the time needed for each aspect of firearm management, including cleaning, inspection, and secure storage, and then integrating these tasks into one schedule in a manner that ensures full adherence to the law. Question 11. The efficiency study reveals a need to streamline the process for obtaining an enhanced concealed weapons license in Idaho. Which of the following approaches would best optimize the application workflow while adhering to Idaho's regulatory framework for firearm licensing? Option A. Prioritize the rapid issuance of licenses by accepting applicant information at face value without implementing robust verification procedures. Option B. Significantly reduce the time allocated for background checks to expedite the issuance of licenses, assuming that most applicants are law-abiding citizens. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of the current application submission, review, and issuance stages, identifying specific bottlenecks and areas for improvement through data collection and stakeholder input, and then proposing targeted, evidence-based modifications to enhance efficiency and accuracy. Option D. Introduce a completely new, untested online application portal with advanced features without providing comprehensive training or support for applicants. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of the current application submission, review, and issuance stages, identifying specific bottlenecks and areas for improvement through data collection and stakeholder input, and then proposing targeted, evidence-based modifications to enhance efficiency and accuracy. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to streamline the process for obtaining an enhanced concealed weapons license in Idaho. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to exercise their Second Amendment rights, as protected by Idaho law, with the state's legitimate interest in ensuring public safety and responsible firearm ownership. A careful judgment is required to implement procedural improvements without compromising the integrity of the licensing process or creating undue burdens on applicants. The best approach involves a systematic review of the current application workflow, identifying bottlenecks and areas for improvement through data analysis and stakeholder feedback, and then proposing targeted, evidence-based modifications to the application submission, review, and issuance stages. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the identified inefficiencies by seeking to optimize the process itself. Idaho Code Section 18-3302, which governs concealed weapons licenses, implicitly supports efficient and fair administration. By focusing on process optimization, this method aligns with the principle of providing a clear and accessible pathway for eligible individuals to obtain their license, while ensuring that all statutory requirements are met. It prioritizes a data-driven and methodical improvement strategy that respects both applicant rights and public safety mandates. An incorrect approach would be to significantly reduce the background check duration without a corresponding increase in the thoroughness of the check. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly compromises public safety by potentially allowing individuals who pose a risk to obtain a concealed weapon license. Idaho law mandates thorough background checks to ensure public safety, and any measure that weakens this safeguard is a violation of the spirit and letter of the law. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a new, complex online application system without adequate testing or user support. While intended to improve efficiency, a poorly executed digital transition can lead to widespread errors, applicant frustration, and delays, ultimately hindering the process rather than optimizing it. This fails to consider the practical implications for applicants and the potential for new inefficiencies to arise. A further incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed of issuance over the accuracy of applicant information verification. This is ethically and legally unsound, as the accuracy of the information provided by an applicant is fundamental to the licensing process. Any deviation from rigorous verification undermines the integrity of the system and the state's ability to ensure responsible firearm ownership. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem, inefficiency in the licensing process. This should be followed by gathering data to understand the root causes, exploring a range of potential solutions, and then evaluating these solutions against established criteria, including legal compliance, Idaho code, ethical considerations, public safety, applicant rights, and practical feasibility. The chosen solution should then be implemented with a plan for ongoing monitoring and evaluation to ensure its effectiveness and to identify further opportunities for improvement. Question 12. The assessment process reveals a scenario in Boise, Idaho, where an individual carrying a concealed weapon under an enhanced concealed weapons license perceives a rapidly escalating verbal confrontation with another person in a public park. The other individual is shouting aggressively and gesturing wildly, but has not physically touched the license holder or produced any weapon. What is the most appropriate course of action for the license holder? Option A. Maintain situational awareness, verbally de-escalate if possible without compromising personal safety, and prepare to defend oneself only if the aggressor makes a clear, imminent move indicating an intent to inflict death or serious bodily harm. Option B. Immediately draw the concealed weapon to deter further aggression from the other individual. Option C. Brandish the concealed weapon as a warning to the aggressor to back away. Option D. Engage in a prolonged verbal argument to try and calm the situation down, even if it means remaining in close proximity to the aggressor. The correct answer is A. Maintain situational awareness, verbally de-escalate if possible without compromising personal safety, and prepare to defend oneself only if the aggressor makes a clear, imminent move indicating an intent to inflict death or serious bodily harm. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in concealed carry scenarios: the tension between immediate perceived threat and adherence to strict legal protocols. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to make rapid, life-altering decisions under extreme duress, where a misjudgment can have severe legal and ethical consequences. The Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License curriculum emphasizes not just proficiency with a firearm, but also a deep understanding of the legal framework governing its use, particularly concerning the use of deadly force and the nuances of concealed carry. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complex interplay of self-defense rights and the specific statutes that define lawful engagement. The correct approach involves a thorough and immediate assessment of the situation, prioritizing de-escalation and lawful retreat if feasible, while simultaneously preparing to defend oneself only when faced with an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm, as defined by Idaho law. This approach is correct because Idaho Code Section 18-3302 specifically outlines the requirements and privileges associated with concealed carry, and Idaho Code Section 18-4009, justifiable homicide, provides the legal framework for the use of deadly force. The law requires that the person reasonably believes the force used is necessary to prevent death or great bodily harm to themselves or another. Prioritizing de-escalation and retreat, when safe and possible, aligns with the principle of using only the force necessary to counter an immediate threat, thereby minimizing legal risk and upholding ethical responsibilities. An incorrect approach that involves immediately drawing a concealed weapon upon perceiving a potential threat, without a clear and imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm, constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action could be construed as an escalation of the situation rather than a response to a legally justifiable threat, potentially violating Idaho's statutes on the use of force and the conditions under which a concealed weapon may be drawn. Another incorrect approach, that of engaging verbally with an individual who has displayed aggressive intent but has not yet presented an imminent threat, while potentially de-escalating, could also be problematic if it delays a necessary defensive action when the threat level escalates rapidly. The failure here lies in not recognizing the threshold for imminent danger as defined by law. Finally, an approach that involves brandishing a weapon as a warning without a direct, immediate threat of death or serious bodily harm is also a failure, as it can be interpreted as an unlawful threat and an unnecessary escalation, potentially leading to legal repercussions under Idaho law. Professional reasoning in such situations should follow a structured decision-making process. 1. Assess the immediate threat level. Is there an imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm? 2. Consider legal obligations. What are the specific Idaho statutes governing the use of force and concealed carry in this context? 3. Evaluate options for de-escalation and retreat. Can the situation be resolved without resorting to force? 4. If force is necessary, ensure it is proportionate to the threat. Is the force used the minimum necessary to counter the imminent danger? 5. Document the event. If applicable, record all actions and observations. Question 13. Considering the provisions of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, regarding enhanced concealed weapons licenses, what is the most appropriate course of action when an applicant for a concealed weapons license in Idaho presents with a history that includes a misdemeanor conviction for assault 5 years ago, for which they completed all court-ordered probation and paid all fines, and also reports a past voluntary mental health evaluation for anxiety that did not result in any adjudication or diagnosis of a mental defect? Option A. Deny the application immediately due to the misdemeanor assault conviction, regardless of its age or completion of sentencing, as any violent offense is an automatic disqualifier. Option B. Deny the application based on the mention of a past mental health evaluation, as any history of seeking mental health treatment is inherently disqualifying for a concealed weapons license in Idaho. Option C. Issue the concealed weapons license without further investigation, assuming that completing probation and paying fines for a past misdemeanor resolves any potential concerns. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's criminal record to confirm the misdemeanor assault conviction and its disposition, and verify that no other disqualifying factors as defined by Idaho law are present, while noting the voluntary mental health evaluation as non-disqualifying in the absence of adjudication. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's criminal record to confirm the misdemeanor assault conviction and its disposition, and verify that no other disqualifying factors as defined by Idaho law are present, while noting the voluntary mental health evaluation as non-disqualifying in the absence of adjudication. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in concealed carry permit applications, balancing the applicant's right to self-defense with the state's responsibility to ensure public safety. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Idaho's specific legal framework for concealed weapons licenses, which prioritizes lawful self-defense while mandating thorough vetting to prevent the issuance of permits to individuals who pose a risk. Careful judgment is required to interpret the applicant's history and determine if it meets the statutory criteria for disqualification without infringing upon constitutional rights. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of the applicant's provided information and any available records, specifically looking for any disqualifying factors as outlined in Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33. This includes a thorough examination of criminal history, mental health records, where legally accessible and relevant to disqualification, and any documented instances of domestic violence or restraining orders. The process must adhere strictly to the statutory definitions of disqualifying offenses and conditions, ensuring that a permit is denied only when legally mandated. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with Idaho's legislative intent to permit concealed carry for law-abiding citizens, while establishing clear, objective criteria for denial, thereby upholding both individual rights and public safety. An incorrect approach would be to deny the permit based on a subjective interpretation of the applicant's demeanor during the interview, without concrete evidence of a statutory disqualifier. This fails to adhere to the objective standards set forth in Idaho law and could lead to an unlawful denial of a permit. Another incorrect approach would be to overlook a documented history of domestic violence, even if the applicant claims it was a misunderstanding. Idaho law explicitly lists domestic violence convictions and restraining orders as disqualifying factors, and failing to act on this information is a direct violation of the statute and a significant public safety risk. Finally, relying solely on a background check that does not delve into specific disqualifying categories, such as mental health adjudications or specific types of misdemeanor convictions, would be insufficient. The law requires a comprehensive review against defined disqualifiers, not a superficial check. Professional reasoning in such situations involves a systematic, evidence-based decision-making process. First, thoroughly understand the specific statutory requirements for concealed weapons licenses in Idaho. Second, gather all relevant information pertaining to the applicant, cross-referencing it against the statutory disqualifiers. Third, Apply the law objectively to the facts, documenting the rationale for any decision. If there is ambiguity, seek guidance from legal counsel or supervisory personnel within the licensing authority. The ultimate goal is to make a decision that is legally sound, ethically defensible, and consistent with the state's mandate to protect its citizens. Question 14. During a lawful traffic stop in Idaho, a peace officer approaches your vehicle. You are legally carrying a concealed firearm under an Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action to ensure a safe and professional interaction? Option A. Calmly inform the officer that you are a licensed concealed carry permit holder and that you have a firearm, while keeping your hands visible and refraining from any sudden movements. Option B. Begin questioning the officer about the reason for the stop and your rights before acknowledging the presence of your firearm. Option C. Remain silent and wait for the officer to specifically ask if you are carrying a concealed weapon before responding. Option D. Immediately reach for your firearm to present it to the officer before they have made any specific requests. The correct answer is A. Calmly inform the officer that you are a licensed concealed carry permit holder and that you have a firearm, while keeping your hands visible and refraining from any sudden movements. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge for Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License holders, navigating the nuances of legal firearm carry in various public spaces, particularly when encountering law enforcement. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate, accurate judgment under potential stress, balancing the right to carry with the duty to comply with legal directives. Misinterpreting or mishandling such an encounter can have severe legal and personal consequences. The best approach involves immediate compliance with lawful orders from a peace officer while clearly and calmly identifying oneself as a license holder and indicating the presence of a firearm. This aligns with Idaho Code Section 18-3302-16, which outlines the requirements for carrying a concealed weapon and the interaction with law enforcement. Specifically, the law requires a license holder to, upon demand of a peace officer, produce the license and permit the officer to inspect the firearm. By calmly identifying oneself and the firearm, the license holder facilitates a safe and lawful interaction, minimizing potential misunderstandings and de-escalating the situation. This proactive communication demonstrates respect for the officer's duty and adherence to the spirit of the law, which prioritizes public safety and responsible firearm ownership. An incorrect approach involves attempting to conceal the firearm further or refusing to acknowledge its presence until explicitly asked. This can be perceived as evasive or obstructive, potentially leading the officer to believe the individual is acting unlawfully or poses a threat. Such behavior directly contradicts the expectation of cooperation with law enforcement and could lead to unnecessary escalation or legal repercussions, even if the individual is legally licensed. Another incorrect approach is to immediately draw the firearm or make sudden movements towards it. This is extremely dangerous and can be interpreted as a hostile act, regardless of the individual's intent or legal status. Idaho law, while permitting concealed carry, does not authorize aggressive or threatening actions towards law enforcement. This approach violates fundamental safety protocols and could result in a tragic outcome. Finally, an incorrect approach is to verbally challenge the officer's authority or question the reason for the stop before complying with the request to identify oneself and the firearm. While citizens have rights, engaging in a debate during a traffic stop or encounter with law enforcement, especially when a firearm is involved, is ill-advised and can create a confrontational atmosphere. The priority in such a situation is to ensure safety and comply with lawful directives, with opportunities to address any perceived impropriety arising later through appropriate legal channels. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation, clear communication, and lawful compliance. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements for carrying a concealed weapon in Idaho, particularly concerning interactions with law enforcement, and practicing calm, measured responses in potentially stressful situations. The goal is to facilitate a safe and lawful encounter for all parties involved. Question 15. The assessment process reveals a common misunderstanding among Idaho residents regarding the legal justification for using deadly force. Considering Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, which of the following best describes the legal standard for employing deadly force in self-defense? Option A. Deadly force is justified when an individual perceives a potential for future harm, even if no immediate threat exists. Option B. Deadly force is justified when an individual feels threatened, regardless of the immediacy or severity of the threat, as long as they believe their life is in danger. Option C. Deadly force is justified only when there is an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to oneself or another, and retreat is not safely possible. Option D. Deadly force is justified if an individual has been previously threatened by the aggressor, even if the current situation does not present an imminent danger. Correct answer is C. Deadly force is justified only when there is an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to oneself or another, and retreat is not safely possible. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge for individuals seeking to enhance their understanding of Idaho's concealed weapons laws beyond the basic requirements, navigating the nuances of legal justification for the use of deadly force in self-defense. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise understanding of legal standards, which can be subjective and fact-dependent, and the potential consequences of misinterpreting these standards are severe, including criminal charges and civil liability. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between lawful self-defense and unjustified use of force. The best approach involves a thorough understanding of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, specifically focusing on the legal definitions and limitations surrounding the use of deadly force in self-defense. This includes recognizing the imminent threat of death or great bodily harm standard and the duty to retreat, where applicable. Adhering to these legal definitions ensures that any action taken is justifiable under Idaho law, minimizing legal risk and upholding ethical responsibilities. This approach prioritizes legal accuracy and responsible application of knowledge. An incorrect approach would be to rely on generalized notions of self-defense or interpretations derived from media portrayals, which often do not align with specific statutory requirements. This failure to ground understanding in Idaho's codified laws can lead to a misapprehension of when force is legally permissible, potentially resulting in actions that are not justifiable under the law. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any perceived threat, regardless of its immediacy or severity, automatically justifies the use of deadly force. Idaho law requires a specific and imminent threat, and a broader interpretation can lead to unlawful use of force. Finally, an incorrect approach is to neglect the duty to retreat when safely possible, as outlined in Idaho law. Failing to consider retreat options when the threat is not immediate or unavoidable can negate the justification for using deadly force. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive review of the relevant Idaho statutes and case law pertaining to self-defense. This should be followed by a critical analysis of the specific circumstances, evaluating the imminence and severity of the threat, and considering any applicable duty to retreat. Seeking clarification from legal counsel or qualified instructors when in doubt is a crucial step in ensuring lawful and ethical conduct. Question 16. The evaluation methodology shows that an individual presents an Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License exam instructor with a valid concealed weapons license issued by the state of Montana and states they have been carrying concealed in Idaho for the past 6 months without incident. The instructor needs to determine the legality of this individual's actions and their eligibility for further training or licensing in Idaho. What is the most prudent course of action for the instructor to advise the individual regarding their current concealed carry status in Idaho? Option A. Recommend that the individual apply for an Idaho Enhanced Concealed Weapons License immediately, as this will supersede any out-of-state permit and ensure full compliance. Option B. Advise the individual to immediately verify Idaho's current reciprocity status with Montana and confirm their personal eligibility under Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, as out-of-state permits are subject to specific agreements and Idaho's own licensing requirements. Option C. Inform the individual that since they possess a concealed weapons license from another state and have not had any legal issues, they are presumed to be legally carrying concealed in Idaho. Option D. Suggest that the individual cease carrying concealed in Idaho until they can obtain a formal legal opinion from an attorney, as the validity of out-of-state permits can be complex and subject to change. The correct answer is B. Advise the individual to immediately verify Idaho's current reciprocity status with Montana and confirm their personal eligibility under Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, as out-of-state permits are subject to specific agreements and Idaho's own licensing requirements. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that understanding the nuances of Idaho's concealed weapons laws is paramount for responsible firearm ownership and adherence to legal requirements. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the specific provisions of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, which governs firearms and concealed weapons, while also considering the ethical implications of carrying a concealed weapon. The decision-making process must prioritize public safety and legal compliance above all else. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of Idaho's reciprocity agreements and the specific requirements for carrying a concealed weapon within the state, even if licensed in another state. This means recognizing that while Idaho generally permits concealed carry for those 18 and older, specific circumstances, and the validity of out-of-state permits are crucial. The best professional practice is to proactively verify the current status of Idaho's reciprocity with the applicant's home state, and to ensure all personal qualifications meet Idaho's standards, including age and any specific training requirements that might be implicitly or explicitly referenced in the context of carrying a concealed weapon. This proactive verification ensures that the individual is legally permitted to carry a concealed weapon in Idaho, thereby avoiding potential legal entanglements and upholding the spirit of the law. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a concealed weapons license from any other state automatically grants the right to carry concealed in Idaho. Idaho Code Section 18-3302 outlines the requirements for concealed weapon licenses and recognizes permits from other states based on reciprocity agreements. Without verifying these agreements, an individual could be in violation of Idaho law. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on general knowledge of firearm laws without consulting the specific statutes and administrative rules governing concealed carry in Idaho. This could lead to misinterpretations of age restrictions, prohibited areas, or the validity of out-of-state permits. Finally, an approach that prioritizes personal convenience over legal compliance, such as carrying concealed without confirming the legality of doing so under Idaho law, demonstrates a severe lapse in professional judgment and a disregard for public safety and legal obligations. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific jurisdiction and relevant statutes. This is followed by a comprehensive review of those statutes and any applicable administrative rules or reciprocity agreements. The next step involves assessing the individual's circumstances against these legal requirements. If any ambiguity exists, seeking clarification from official sources, such as the Idaho State Police or legal counsel specializing in firearm law, is essential. The ultimate goal is to ensure that any action taken is fully compliant with the law and ethically sound. Question 17. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average processing time for enhanced concealed weapons license applications within the Idaho Sheriff's Office over the past quarter. Considering the mandate to uphold public safety and adhere to Idaho Code, which of the following strategies would be the most effective and legally sound method for addressing this trend? Option A. Maintain the current application processing procedures, as the increase in processing time may be a temporary fluctuation and does not warrant immediate operational changes. Option B. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to pinpoint specific stages causing delays. Consult Idaho Code Section 18-3302 for compliance requirements, and implement targeted process improvements based on data. Option C. Immediately hire additional administrative staff to handle the increased workload, assuming more personnel will naturally reduce processing times. Option D. Expedite the background check process by reducing the number of agencies contacted and the depth of inquiry for each applicant. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to pinpoint specific stages causing delays. Consult Idaho Code Section 18-3302 for compliance requirements and implement targeted process improvements based on data. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the processing times for concealed weapons license applications within the Idaho Sheriff's Office. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety, the efficiency of law enforcement resources, and the constitutional rights of citizens. Delays can lead to frustration, potential legal challenges, and a perception of governmental inefficiency. Sheriff's deputies and administrative staff must balance thoroughness and due diligence with the imperative to process applications in a timely manner, adhering strictly to Idaho code. The best approach involves a systematic review of the application workflow to identify bottlenecks and implement targeted improvements. This includes analyzing each stage of the process, from initial submission and background checks to final approval and issuance. By examining data on where delays are occurring, the Sheriff's Office can then consult Idaho Code Section 18-3302, which outlines the requirements and timelines for concealed weapons license applications to ensure any proposed changes remain compliant. For instance, if background checks are consistently taking longer than anticipated, the office might explore ways to streamline communication with relevant agencies or invest in more efficient database search tools, all while ensuring no compromise on the integrity of the check itself. This data-driven, compliant approach prioritizes both efficiency and adherence to state law, an approach that focuses solely on increasing staff numbers without understanding the root cause of the delays is procedurally flawed. More staff might seem like a solution. It could simply add to existing inefficiencies if the underlying process is broken. This fails to address the core issue and may not lead to significant improvements, potentially wasting taxpayer resources. Another ineffective approach would be to relax the thoroughness of background checks to speed up processing. This is a direct violation of Idaho Code Section 18-3302, which mandates specific checks to ensure public safety. Compromising the integrity of the background check process poses a severe ethical and legal risk, undermining the purpose of the concealed weapons licensing system and potentially endangering the public. Finally, an approach that involves ignoring the performance metrics and continuing with the current workflow is professionally negligent. It demonstrates a lack of accountability and a failure to proactively manage resources and public services. This inaction allows potential problems to fester, leading to continued inefficiencies and potential breaches of public trust and legal obligations. Professionals should employ a continuous improvement framework. This involves regularly collecting and analyzing performance data, comparing it against established legal requirements, like Idaho Code Section 18-3302, identifying areas for improvement, implementing changes, and then re-evaluating the impact of those changes. This iterative process ensures that operational efficiency is maintained while upholding all legal and ethical responsibilities. Question 18. Regulatory review indicates that an Idaho resident holding a valid enhanced concealed weapons license is attending a community event held at a local public park. The event includes various vendors and a designated area for children's activities. While the park itself is generally open to the public, there is no explicit signage prohibiting firearms. Considering Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, what is the most prudent course of action for the licensee regarding their concealed firearm? Option A. Leave the concealed firearm secured in their vehicle, as the presence of children's activities and a large public gathering creates a potentially sensitive environment where carrying may be misconstrued or cause undue concern. Option B. Assume that the license implicitly grants permission to carry in all public spaces, regardless of the specific nature of the event or the potential for heightened scrutiny. Option C. Carry the concealed firearm, as the park is a public space and there is no specific signage prohibiting firearms, and the license permits concealed carry. Option D. Carry the concealed firearm but remain vigilant and prepared to conceal it further or leave if any individual expresses discomfort or concern. Correct answer is C. Carry the concealed firearm, as the park is a public space and there is no specific signage prohibiting firearms, and the license permits concealed carry. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a licensee's right to carry a concealed weapon and the responsibility to ensure public safety and adhere strictly to Idaho's concealed weapons laws. The licensee must exercise sound judgment and prioritize legal compliance and responsible behavior over personal convenience or assumptions. Careful consideration of the specific circumstances and the precise wording of Idaho statutes is paramount. The best approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, specifically focusing on the provisions governing concealed weapons licenses and prohibited places. This approach prioritizes legal compliance by recognizing that even with a valid license, carrying a concealed weapon into a location where it is explicitly prohibited by Idaho law is a violation. This means actively seeking out and respecting signage, understanding statutory prohibitions, and making a conscious decision to leave the weapon secured if entering a restricted area. This aligns with the ethical obligation of a licensee to act responsibly and avoid creating potential legal entanglements or compromising public safety. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a concealed weapons license grants unrestricted carry privileges in all locations, disregarding posted signage or statutory prohibitions. This demonstrates a failure to understand the limitations of the license as defined by Idaho law, and an abdication of the licensee's responsibility to be aware of and comply with these restrictions. This could lead to criminal charges and revocation of the license. Another incorrect approach involves relying on personal interpretation of whether a location asterisk should asterisk be prohibited, rather than adhering to explicit legal prohibitions or clear signage. This subjective judgment can lead to violations if the licensee's interpretation differs from the legal standard or the establishment's policy, which is often informed by legal requirements. A further incorrect approach is to believe that the license somehow overrides or negates the prohibitions of specific locations, such as schools or federal buildings, as defined by Idaho code. The concealed weapons license is a permit to carry concealed under specific conditions, not a blanket exemption from all location-based restrictions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of Idaho's concealed weapons laws. Before entering any establishment or public space, they should actively look for signage indicating prohibitions. If unsure, they should err on the side of caution and inquire or leave the weapon secured. This proactive and legally compliant mindset is crucial for maintaining both their license and public trust. Question 19. Performance analysis shows that individuals carrying a concealed weapon in Idaho may encounter various public safety scenarios. Considering Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, which approach best reflects the responsible and lawful conduct of a concealed weapons license holder when witnessing a potential crime in progress that does not immediately threaten their personal safety or the safety of others present. Option A. Immediately intervene by displaying the concealed firearm to deter the perpetrator and ensure the safety of potential victims, regardless of personal threat. Option B. Assume the role of an enforcer and attempt to apprehend the perpetrator using the concealed firearm as a means of control, if deemed necessary to prevent the crime. Option C. Contact law enforcement and provide a detailed description of the situation and individuals involved, while remaining at a safe distance and avoiding direct confrontation. Option D. Assess the situation for any immediate threat to personal safety or the safety of others. Prioritize de-escalation and avoidance if possible, and only consider the use of the concealed weapon if there is an imminent danger of death or great bodily harm. The correct answer is D. Assess the situation for any immediate threat to personal safety or the safety of others. Prioritize de-escalation and avoidance if possible, and only consider the use of the concealed weapon if there is an imminent danger of death or great bodily harm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their personal right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed weapon in Idaho. The core challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Idaho law regarding the permissible use of deadly force and the specific circumstances under which a concealed weapon license holder can act. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges, even if the individual believes they are acting lawfully. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a perceived threat and a legally justifiable use of force. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, specifically concerning the lawful carrying of concealed weapons and the justifiable use of force. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and avoidance of confrontation whenever possible, recognizing that the primary purpose of the concealed weapons license is for personal protection in situations where avoidance is no longer feasible. When confronted with a situation that appears to necessitate the use of a firearm, The individual must assess whether the threat meets the legal standard for imminent danger of death or great bodily harm as defined by Idaho law. This means the threat must be immediate, and the use of force must be a last resort to prevent such harm. The license holder must be prepared to articulate, based on objective circumstances, why they believe their life or the life of another was in imminent danger. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that having a concealed weapons license automatically grants the authority to intervene in any perceived criminal activity, regardless of personal threat. This fails to recognize that the license permits carrying a concealed weapon and does not grant law enforcement powers or a mandate to act as a vigilante. Idaho law requires a direct threat to oneself or another to justify the use of deadly force. Another incorrect approach is to use the firearm in a situation where de-escalation or retreat is a reasonable and safe option. Idaho law, like many jurisdictions, may impose a duty to retreat if safely possible, particularly outside of one's home, before resorting to deadly force. Failing to consider or attempt de-escalation or retreat when feasible is a significant legal and ethical failing. A further incorrect approach is to brandish or display the firearm as a show of force or intimidation in a situation that does not meet the legal threshold for imminent danger. This can escalate a situation unnecessarily and could lead to charges of assault or menacing, even if no shots are fired. The firearm is intended as a tool for defense against imminent threats, not for intimidation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Idaho carrying a concealed weapon should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with threat assessment and avoidance. This involves constantly evaluating surroundings and potential risks. If a confrontation becomes unavoidable, the framework shifts to assessing the imminence and severity of the threat against the legal standards for justifiable use of force in Idaho. This assessment must be objective and based on observable facts. If the legal threshold is met, the use of force must be proportionate to the threat. Throughout any encounter, maintaining situational awareness and prioritizing personal safety and legal compliance are paramount. Understanding the specific provisions of Idaho Code Title 18, Chapter 33, and the principles of justifiable use of force is a continuous professional responsibility. Question 20. The assessment process reveals that the Idaho Sheriff's Department is experiencing a backlog in processing concealed weapons license applications. To manage this, the department is considering implementing a new internal target for application completion. If the statutory maximum processing time for an initial application review in Idaho is 90 days, and the law permits an additional 30 days for further investigation if deemed necessary, what is the absolute maximum number of days the Sheriff's Department can legally take to process a concealed weapons license application before it is considered constructively issued or subject to legal challenge due to undue delay, assuming an investigation is required? Option A, 105 days. Option B, 75 days. Option C, 120 days. Option D, 90 days. Correct answer is C, 120 days. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in managing concealed carry permits, balancing the efficient processing of applications with the absolute necessity of thorough background checks. This scenario is professionally challenging because delays in processing can impact an applicant's rights, while insufficient diligence can compromise public safety. The core of the challenge lies in the mathematical calculation of processing times against established statutory limits, ensuring compliance without compromising the integrity of the vetting process. The best professional approach involves a systematic calculation of the maximum allowable processing time based on Idaho law, factoring in the statutory deadlines for initial review and any permissible extensions for further investigation. This approach ensures that the permit office operates within legal parameters, providing a clear benchmark for application timelines. Specifically, Idaho Code Section 18-3302 outlines the timeframe for issuing or denying a concealed weapons license. The law generally allows 90 days for the sheriff to issue or deny the license. If an investigation is required, the sheriff can extend this period by an additional 30 days, for a total of 120 days. Therefore, calculating the total permissible processing window is paramount. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on an average processing time, without considering the statutory maximums. This could lead to applications being delayed beyond the legal limit, potentially resulting in a constructive issuance of the permit or legal challenges. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize speed over thoroughness, cutting corners on background checks to meet arbitrary internal deadlines. This directly violates the public safety mandate inherent in the licensing process and the spirit of Idaho's concealed weapons laws. Finally, failing to account for potential extensions for further investigation, as permitted by statute, would also be an error, as it underestimates the maximum time legally available for a comprehensive review. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the statutory requirements, including maximum processing times and conditions for extensions. This should be followed by establishing internal workflows that are designed to meet these requirements, while ensuring comprehensive background checks. Regular audits of processing times and adherence to legal mandates are crucial to maintain both efficiency and compliance.